we'll make a start. We're running a little bit late, so apologies for that. The last guy obviously had a lot more to say than I did. I should say. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark. I am a senior volunteer with Sea Shepherd. I'm an advocate for all animal rights and a campaigner across a range of animal-based issues. I've been involved with Sea Shepherd now for a few years. I've been on a few of their campaigns in Japan and so on. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be talking for around about 35 minutes or so, and then afterwards, if you've got any questions, we'll have a bit of a Q&A session. Can everyone hear me at the back? Is that all right? Can you hear me okay? Good, let's start. Okay, so if the oceans die, we die. Now that's become Captain Paul Watson's catchphrase. For those of you who don't know who Captain Paul Watson is, does anybody not know who Captain Paul Watson is? Right, okay. Captain Paul Watson is the founder and the honorary president of Sea Shepherd. Okay, if you want to know more about him, come down and see us on the stall. But so that's one of his sound bites, and it's used frequently whenever we talk about the state of the oceans. It's a very dramatic quote. It sounds perhaps a little bit over the top, but those of you who do know Captain Paul Watson will know that he does love a bit of drama. Well, today I'm going to talk about how much truth there is in that quote, and I'm going to talk about how our behaviour and our treatment of the oceans is bringing Captain Watson's prediction ever closer. If the oceans die, we die. Now, sitting here in Wolverhampton, miles from the sea, it'd be easy to think that actually there are far more pressing matters going on in the world, pressing issues, than the state of the oceans. And right now, that may be true around the world. There are some pretty important issues to resolve. But if we don't start reversing the processes that are killing our oceans right now, it'll be too late. As Jacques Cousteau once said, the oceans are dying in our time. Now, it may not be our time, it may be our kids' time, it'll certainly be within our grandchildren's time if we don't start doing something about it now. For centuries, the people have regarded the oceans as an inexhaustible supply of food, a convenient transport route, and a convenient dumping ground as well, simply too vast to be affected by anything that humans could do. But human activity, particularly over the last few decades, has finally pushed the oceans to their limit. They are overfished, polluted, taken for granted, carelessly abused and destroyed, and much more fragile and complex than we ever thought was possible. The largest living space on this planet is fast deteriorating. The oceans are our life support system. Over 80% of the oxygen that we breathe comes from the oceans. It comes from the plankton in the oceans. So for every 10 breaths we take, we have to thank the oceans for 8 of those breaths. They regulate our climate, they regulate the temperature, and they absorb a vast amount of the carbon dioxide that we produce. They are the fuel, really, that powers planet Earth. And this planet needs a crew. Now, we're not the crew, we're just passengers, okay? The crew are the trees, the plants, everything in the sea, from the bacteria, the plankton, the fish, the sharks, right up to the great whales. And we are killing the crew. And we can only kill so many crew members before this machinery grinds to a halt. And we are not killing them slowly. Now, every now and again, the UN releases a report about the state of the oceans. And every single time one of these reports comes out, it gets worse. They're like police academy films. You know, every time one comes out, they just get more and more unbearable. And a recent one states that at the current rate of fishing, all of the fish species that we currently fish for will be extinct by 2048. Now that's at the current rate. There's nothing to suggest that the rate is getting slower. So if anything, this already short time period could get even shorter. There are lots of threats to the oceans, lots of them, but right there at the top of them is overfishing. we, hopefully nobody in this room, but we humans have an insatiable appetite for fish. And as a result, 53% of all the world's fisheries are fully exploited. 32% of them are overexploited, depleted, or struggling to recover from depletion. Of the top 10 fisheries in the world, most of them, which account for about 30% of all the fish that we catch, are fully or overexploited. We've lost several important species of fish, and many more have declined to the point where their survival is really under threat right now. And yet governments, driven by greed and the power of the food and the agriculture industry, just seem either powerless or probably more unwilling to do anything about it. They spend hundreds of millions of pounds and dollars subsidising the fuel that sends these ships out into the ocean, and they subsidise the ships themselves, and they're just keeping these monsters of the sea out in the oceans. There are literally hundreds of illegal, unlisted and unregistered ships that are circulating the seas. They ignore quotas. Most of the quotas are ridiculous anyway, but they just ignore them. And they're poaching fish in numbers that are impossible to quantify and much harder to stomach. Even the legally registered vessels are using outdated, destructive fishing techniques which are absolutely destroying the ocean floor, like bottom trawling, for example. And they're indiscriminately catching fish and cetaceans they have no use for. In some parts of the world, bycatch, as we call it, so the extra fish that are caught, can be as high as 15 to 1. So for every one fish that is in the ship's quota, 15 of them are being caught as bycatch. So they're killing them and then they're throwing them back in the ocean so they don't get recorded on their quotas. In the Gulf of Mexico there alone, every year 25 million red snapper are caught as bycatch. 25 million. Some of the figures I'm going to come out with today are beyond understanding. But 25 million red snapper are caught as bycatch. And the total global catch of bycatch of fish is estimated at 40 million tonnes a year. Now that's a conservative estimate. We don't really know what the total tonnage of bycatch is, but the estimate is 40 million. And as well as killing fish in these unimaginable quantities, a lot of these vessels are dumping nets in the sea. So when the nets get damaged, they're literally just dropping them into the oceans. And these nets are killing up to 100,000 albatross every year, and they've been a major factor in 6 of the 7 species of sea turtles now being listed as endangered. Sharks. Sharks are the apex predators of the oceans, and they have shaped the evolution of thousands of species. They've been around for 450 million years. They predate the dinosaurs, and they have survived 5 previous mass extinctions. But thanks to humans, who, let's face it, have only been around for a couple of minutes in the overall scheme of things, they're now facing their own extinction. 100 million sharks are caught for their fins every year. That's 275,000 sharks every single day. And they have their fins cut off, and then so they're caught, they hack the fins off, and they literally just dump them back in the oceans where they die a very slow, painful death. And they're doing that just so that they can put their fins into a shitty soup. And the soup, the fin adds no flavour to the soup. The flavour in shark fin soup comes from chicken stock. All the fin does, so these 100 million fins that are being caught, hacked off every year, is just increase the price of the soup and give it that kind of exclusivity that seems to be craved in some parts of the world. And these fishermen are constantly telling us that we need to get rid of the seals, and we need to get rid of the dolphins and the whales and the seabirds because they're all taking their fish, as if they've got some kind of ownership of these fish. But the truth is, there's an ecosystem going on here, and it's worked perfectly well for a very long time without any human interference. If you want more fish in the sea, you need more seals, you need more dolphins, you need more whales, more sharks, and you need more seabirds. the top of the food chain, the whales, the great whales, provide all of the nutrients for the plankton. A blue whale will excrete up to 3 tons of plankton every day. And that plankton, I beg your pardon, it will excrete up to 3 tons of nutrients, which then sink to the bottom, feed the plankton, which feeds the small fish, which feed the medium fish, which in turn feeds the whales. It's a cycle, it's a process that works. Now, this situation can only be reversed if we impose a complete ban on all commercial fishing. That means the end of long lines, drift nets, gill nets, bottom trawlers and the like. Now that sounds really extreme, but there are many, many scientists around the world who believe that this is both necessary and inevitable. We need a return to artisanal, traditional fishing. Now people will moan about the loss of jobs, but what about the tens of thousands of jobs that have been lost around India, thanks to the European and Asian fishing fleets completely destroying their local fisheries? The fishermen of India, the fishermen of West Africa, who have now had to turn to crime, to piracy, because they've got no other source of income, because their local source of fish has been completely devastated. And we take from the oceans, and we put nothing back in apart from pollution. So many of you will be cottoning on to this concept of animal agriculture. Animal agriculture as a pollutant is the biggest threat to the whole planet. With methane emissions, I'm sure you've all heard about it recently, but they are creating these massive dead zones in the ocean. Across the world, there are vast areas of oceans and lakes that are running out of oxygen, making it nearly impossible for aquatic and marine life to survive. In the 1960s, there were 49 dead zones around the world. There are now over 400, and that number is increasing at an alarming rate. So nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus are pouring into our oceans, and what they do is they fuel these huge algal blooms. And when the excess algae dies, it sinks to the bottom of the ocean and it's consumed by bacteria, and it drains the water of oxygen. And when the water becomes too low in oxygen or hypoxic, marine life flees. And everything that is too slow or can't move just dies, and that's why they're called dead zones. In the central states and the southern states of the USA, these dead zones are becoming a real problem in the Gulf. Runoff from animal agriculture is creating massive dead zones all along the top of the Gulf of Mexico. And that's an area which is normally extremely rich in biodiversity. So these chemicals are found in fertilizers used in crops and in the feces of livestock. In the US alone, livestock generates 3,200 tons of excrement every minute. That's 3,200 tons every minute. That's nearly as much bullshit as you get in Parliament on a Wednesday. And a huge amount of that is ending up in the oceans, and it's adding to the dead zone. That's the excrement from the cows, not from Parliament. So aside from the issues of pollution from animal agriculture, livestock are also consuming huge amounts of fish in their meal. It wasn't that long ago that pigs and chickens ate grass and grains and food scraps. Today, in the throes of this perverse industrial food system that we have that favours cheap protein and quick growth, we now feed farm animals fish, a lot of fish. Every year, we are feeding 14 million tonnes. I'm sorry about all these figures, but it paints a picture here. 14 million tonnes of wild-caught fish are being fed to pigs and chickens. So that's anchovies, sardines, mackerel, herring and the like. And let's face it, pigs and chickens, you don't normally consider them really as aquatic predators. That amounts to 17% of all of the wild fish that is caught globally. And it increases to 30 million tonnes if you include the wild fish that we grind up to feed to farmed fish. Okay? So pigs and chickens are eating double the amount of fish that the Japanese consume, and 6 times more than the entire US population eats in a year.
So is this figure in America, this 14 million tonnes?
No, the 14 million tonnes is globally.
Global.
Yeah. We've also got the problem of ocean acidification. Now, putting it simply, we are burning way too much fossil fuel and generating way too much carbon dioxide. Now, the oceans normally would absorb the carbon dioxide for us, but at the rate that we are pumping it out, the oceans can't cope. And this means that the pH level of the oceans are dropping to the point where marine life just can't survive anymore. And at some point in time, there's going to be a tipping point where the oceans will just become too acidic to support life that can't quickly adjust. And dozens more species are going to be wiped out. Over the last 40 years, we have used more plastic than we did in the whole of the last century. And this is putting enormous strains on our ocean. Almost half of the plastic that we use is used once and then it's thrown away. But the problem is, there is no away. And huge amounts of plastics are finding their way into the ocean, and they're moving around the sea as these massive plastic islands. Right slap bang in the middle of the Pacific, there is a plastic island that is the same size as France. Okay, that's just one of those islands. Over 250 different marine species have known to have ingested or become entangled in this plastic, and 8% of seals and sea lions have at some point become entangled in discarded plastic nets. The UN, another one of these deeply depressing UN report, states that around 130,000 cetaceans, so small whales and dolphins, are caught in plastic nets every year. Over 100 species of birds are known to have ingested plastic, and around 95% of fulmars, which is a type of gull, have plastic in their stomach, which affects them mechanically and in chemical ways. 31 species of marine mammals are known to have ingested marine plastic. And there's another problem with these big plastic islands floating around the ocean, and that's a problem known as biotic mixing. Now, these huge islands of plastic basically provide perfect transport for non-endemic species to move around the oceans, and this has a catastrophic impact when they're introduced to indigenous species. It's still very depressing, isn't it? It gets better, a little bit. Coral reef. Coral reef is the backbone of our oceanic ecosystem, and it is being destroyed at an alarming rate. The warming of the oceans is causing bleaching, as coral tissue ejects the algae, and then bleached coral becomes highly susceptible to other pollutions such as agrochemicals and industrial pollution. And then we've got problems with leisure users, boaters, just recklessly driving over coral, divers not being careful with coral, and poachers in particular taking wildlife for the home aquarium trade. A lot of the stuff you see in people's houses comes from coral reef areas, and this is all making the situation a lot worse. There are reports out there that suggest that up to 70% of coral has been damaged beyond repair, and the other 30% is at risk. Okay. In some parts of the world, such as the Indo-Pacific, the main cause of reef destruction is blast fishing. This is fishing using dynamite. Okay. The blast damaged the reef beyond repair, and what we end up with is these giant underwater rubble fields, and nothing can survive in there. They're completely incapable of sustaining any kind of life. And on top of the blast fishing in Southeast Asia, we've got cyanide fishing. And that's widespread in coral reefs as well. The fishermen actually go down there, they've got very primitive apparatus. I mean, it's dangerous for the fishermen themselves, but they go down there with like a hose pipe sticking up out the water to breathe in, and they take bottles of cyanide down there and they spray it in between the layers of coral. And that stuns the fish, and it makes them very easy to catch. The edible fish, they then rinse them for 10 days and sell them on as food. And then the inedible fish is basically sold on to the home aquarium industry. And if you take all of the exports from the Philippines, 90% of the exports from the Philippines for the home aquarium industry are caught using cyanide. And this is basically devastating coral reef. Many fishing and diving areas right across Southeast Asia are already severely damaged from the impact of dynamite fishing, and then they've been ruined completely by cyanide fishing. It slows down photosynthesis, which basically results in the coral reefs losing colour, and it eliminates their food source and makes them completely uninhabitable. And these coral reefs are very important to us. Most importantly, they provide shelter and protection for about 25% of all known marine species. Obviously there's a lot more out there that we don't know about. Without coral reef, these fish are left homeless and have got nowhere to breed. And healthy coral also plays a major part in that absorption of carbon dioxide that I was talking about earlier. I'm nearly done with all the miserable stuff, but you need to know what it's like. I'll take questions at the end, sorry. The hunting of apex predators and the killing of whales is not just cruel. Like all of these threats I've mentioned so far, it threatens to upset a food chain that has been kept in balance by evolution for millennia. If we kill all of the big fish, we'll have too many of the middle-sized fish. And then all of the middle-sized fish will eat all the small fish, and then there's no one left to eat the really small organisms like the plankton and the algae. And the end result is this turns to slime. And we end up with these massive oxygen-depleted dead zones again, where nothing can survive except bacteria. So what we're doing is we're taking all the complex evolutionary species and we're getting rid of them all, and we're replacing them with the most basic species on Earth. So it's almost like evolution in reverse here, is what we're doing. Now, I say all this has probably put you into a deep depression, and you're probably starting to wish you'd gone to another talk somewhere else. I know that when I'm doing my research, I find it really upsetting, so I can sympathise, but there is hope. And organisations such as Sea Shepherd are making a difference. We're tackling these issues in a way that no other organisation, whether it be governmental or charitable, has yet been able to match. Now, most of us, or some of you will best know us for our work in the Antarctic with the Japanese whalers, so many of you will have seen whale wars and so on. But Sea Shepherd is a lot more than that. For all of the threats that I've talked about, and many, many more, Sea Shepherd has a campaign running somewhere in the world, and our successes are unmatched. So what I'm going to do is just run through some of those, because some of these are little known campaigns that we run. We were very fortunate this year, not as fortunate as the whales, but the Japanese, as you may know, didn't go down to the Antarctic in this last hunting season, thanks to a ruling by the International Court of Justice that their scientific research was bogus. Well, we all knew that anyway, and we didn't really need anyone to tell us. They have announced that they will go back down there this year. But last year, we still sent our ships back down to the Antarctic to tackle the pirate fishermen who are draining the Southern Ocean of the toothfish, the Antarctic toothfish. Now, most of you will know that as Chilean sea bass. Chilean sea bass doesn't really exist. It's not an actual fish. It's the Antarctic toothfish. But let's face it, when you go into a restaurant, you don't really want to order toothfish. It doesn't sound very nice. So actually, the name Chilean sea bass came from a restaurateur. Two of our ships, the Bob Barker and the Sam Simon, left Australia and New Zealand respectively in December last year, and within 2 weeks had located the most notorious illegal toothfish vessel known as Thunder. This is a real grubby, horrible ship that has been run by criminal syndicates, and it's been plundering the oceans for many, many years without any real interference from the governments anywhere. And then in the 110 days that followed, the Bob Barker ship engaged in a world record-breaking pursuit of Thunder, covering approximately 11,500 nautical miles, chasing it from the Southern Ocean to the Indian Ocean and finally ending up in the Atlantic Ocean. And on April the 6th, in an unexpected turn of events, the Thunder was scuttled by its own crew in the waters of Sao Tome and Principe off the West African coast. We rescued all of the crew, Their ship was intentionally scuttled. We rescued them, put them all on the Bob Barker, and then delivered them all to the authorities later the next day. Now, in the last couple of weeks, just bear in mind this is back in April, in the last couple of weeks, the Chilean captain of the Thunder received a 3-year prison sentence. The Spanish chief engineer was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months, and the second mechanic to 2 years and 8 months. And collectively, the three of them were fined $17 million. And that was all down to our campaign out there. Now, while the Bob Barker was chasing Thunder, and I did have lots of lovely pictures to show you of this, but unfortunately the thing's not working. Our other ship, the Sam Simon, recovered 72 kilometres of discarded nets from Thunder. So whilst it was being chased, Thunder was dumping all its nets, and we collected all of those, 72 kilometres of nets. It's hard to get your head around. The Sam Simon also intercepted 3 more vessels and pursued them out of the Southern Ocean. 2 were subsequently seized by Malaysian authorities and 1 by Thai authorities. 2 other ships fled from the Southern Ocean and fled to Cape Verde Islands, where they were identified by Captain Hammerstead, one of our captains, in spite of them changing their name and their flags, which is quite a common practice with illegal ships. They just change flags frequently. They were seized, and that meant that all 6 of the Interpol-listed Toothfish fleet were seized and had their illegal operations stopped. That is a remarkable achievement by Sea Shepherd. Now, our fleet consists of 9 ships now, and we are having a 10th ship purposely built. It's the first time Sea Shepherd's ever had one purposely built, and that is thanks to a lottery grant. We put a very strong bid in for money from the Dutch postcode lottery, and we got an €8 million grant, and we're building a very nice fast ship which basically can outrun any of the illegal unlisted ships out there. Our fleet will be used all around the world, doing what others won't do or can't do. We're working with governments in Senegal, Guatemala, Mexico, Galapagos Islands, and many others to stop illegal fishing and poaching of wildlife. The general impression of Sea Shepherd is that we tend to work very much on our own and we don't like anyone in authority. That's not true. We have a number of campaigns running in conjunction with law enforcement agencies around the world. We provide them with patrol boats, we provide them equipment, training, and most importantly, we provide them with know-how. We've been doing this for 38 years now. We've got a lot of knowledge. We provide sniffer dogs to the Galapagos Islands to detect wildlife that's been taken from that delicately balanced habitat. Now, I was talking about pollution earlier. We have a program called the Vortex program. This has been established with G-Star. I don't know if any of you know G-Star clothing, and it's headed by Pharrell Williams. And what we're doing there is actually removing plastic from the oceans and turning it into clothing. Our operations to save the whales in the southern oceans, they have led to us being called eco-terrorists and pirates, amongst all sorts of other names. But without those campaigns, there will be 6,000 less whales swimming in the southern oceans. And let's not forget that these whales are being hunted in a UN-recognised whale sanctuary, the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary. The lack of willing from governments to tackle these issues head-on is just staggering. It is a crime that the responsibility should fall on the shoulders of Sea Shepherd, the only organisation, governmental or otherwise, to go down to the Southern Ocean in the Antarctic to enforce internationally recognised wildlife and environmental laws. Another campaign we've got running is in the Sea of Cortez in the Gulf of California. We have a research vessel called the Martin Sheen, and that has just finished a campaign working with the government of Mexico to protect the vaquita porpoise. Now, for those of you who don't know the vaquita porpoise, which probably is most of you, it is the smallest porpoise on the planet, and it is the most endangered. There are currently estimated around 97 vaquita porpoise left, that's all. And they are disappearing at an alarming rate, and they are very, very slow to reproduce. It's reckoned that really they've only got 2 or 3 years left unless we do something about it. So what we're doing there, most of these incidentally get caught in discarded nets. That's how they're getting killed. They're not being hunted as such, but there's a lot of discarded nets in the Gulf of California, and these vaquita porpoises just seem to have a habit of getting stuck in them. So we have been patrolling the Gulf of California, the Sea of Cortez, removing as many nets as we possibly can, and trying to catch the vessels that are dumping the nets. And the vessels that are dumping the nets are illegal vessels which are hunting another endangered fish called the totuaba fish. So it's, they're trying to catch one fish that's in danger of extinction, and at the same time they're putting another one in danger. Here in the UK, dozens of volunteers headed up to Scotland between Easter and the end of August last year and this year to protect seals from the rifles of the wild salmon netting companies. Hundreds of seals were saved, and prosecutions have been brought against the salmon netters, whose dismal practices are just devastating wild salmon stocks and also harming in large numbers seabirds, which is illegal in this country. So we were constantly monitoring the nets, and we were being ready to put ourselves between the rifles and the seals, and our volunteers have made a huge dent in the netters' operations. And we expect to see an end to this industry and therefore an end to the indiscriminate shooting of seals in the very near future in Scotland. We then will turn our attention to other areas of the UK that still carry out the killing of seals, primarily England, Northumberland. I know that many of you will know about the campaign in Taiji, and it's a very, very big, high-profile campaign. And we are still out there. We're trying to bring the world's attention to this horrific and almost daily dolphin hunts that take place out there. In spite of Japan's best efforts to keep our volunteers out of the country and keep their dirty little industry under wraps, our Cove Guardians from around the world put their liberty on the line to keep the dolphin hunts in the world's media. And we did a similar thing in the Faroe Islands this year and last year, which involved hundreds of international volunteers and our ships in an attempt to intervene in the vile traditions of the grind, which is the name given to the drive hunting of pilot whales. We had a number of volunteers arrested, which raises the profile of the campaign and brings international condemnation on the Faroese and their backers, the Danish government. We drove pods of pilot whales away from the islands, leaving them free to swim and do what they should be doing. The Martin Sheen vessel that I was talking about earlier has just announced this week another campaign in the Sea of Cortez, and this is a research assignment working with one of Mexico's top universities to study the effects of microplastics on biodiversity. Now, microplastics are the sort of thing that you get in cosmetics. I would strongly encourage you not to use scrubs that have microbeads in them. They all end up in the sea. What we're going to be doing is studying the effect of these microbeads on fin whales, because the fin whales are the longest living apex predators in that area, and their numbers have been in decline recently, and there is a theory that it is down to these microplastics. We carried out another research project in the Gulf of Mexico to examine the effects of the BP oil spill. We worked with the Oceanic Preservation Society, and we were able to carry out groundbreaking research which actually found out that the chemicals that the oil companies use to clean up the oil is causing more damage to wildlife than actually the oil itself. And this has led to significant changes in the way that the oil industry is tackling the environmental damage caused by these big spills. We are tackling the problems with coral reef that I talked about earlier. We have a long-running, ongoing campaign in Hawaii called Operation Reef Defense, and that is an operation to expose the multi-billion-dollar industry that has no enforcement, no monitoring, and literally no limits. It's another case of an out-of-sight, out-of-mind issue that is exploiting resources and trafficking wildlife just for a hobby. We support the Big Island community and their own initiatives to take control of the ocean around them and the reefs around them. Last year we had one of our divers was nearly killed when she was physically assaulted at 50 feet under the water. She had a regulator ripped from her mouth and her line cut. and luckily she was very experienced and was able to cope. But we have divers working constantly on coral reef areas to patrol them and prevent their further damage. Turtles. Earlier this year we had volunteers stationed in Costa Rica, southeast Florida and Honduras to protect the breeding beaches of the endangered sea turtles. We ensured that they were able to do their nesting without any interference from humans. In Costa Rica, particularly, the meat is highly prized and the eggs are sold on the black market as aphrodisiacs. We were there 24 hours a day to protect these nests from the poachers, who are incredibly aggressive. It's in Costa Rica particularly, it's a very dangerous area for us to be working in. But this year we estimate that we saved around 10,000 hatchlings. In Florida, we kept beach users away from the nests and ensured that commerce in the area didn't interfere with the hatching turtles with their lighting and so on, made sure that they were kept safe. And we actually physically escorted turtles to and from the beach, from the water, to make sure they stayed safe. Nice campaign to be on, that one, on a beach in Florida also. Now these are all examples of how Sea Shepherd's direct action campaigns are fighting the relentless threats to our oceans, but we can't do it alone. We're not daft. We know we need help. But the fact that we can't do it on our own won't stop us fighting, and we will continue to fight to preserve the lifeline that the oceans provide. But each and every one of us here and everywhere is capable of having a positive impact on the oceans, no matter where in the world we live. We can all reduce the amount of plastic we use, and we can dispose of what we do use responsibly. We can encourage others to reduce the amount of fish and meat that they eat. I know probably most of you, if not all of you, don't eat any. We should try and encourage other people not to eat fish and meat. And if they do want to continue to eat it, then we should really make them understand the consequences of their choices. We should encourage them to learn where their fish comes from and ensure that they eat sustainably sourced fish whenever possible. Although I have to tell you, I don't know that there really is currently any sustainably sourced fish, or certainly not any that's easily identifiable. We need to get behind organisations like Sea Shepherd and support the direct action campaigns that we undertake. We need to force governments to stand up and be counted. What is the use of introducing conservation areas, sanctuaries, preservation areas, if no one is around to police them? The high seas are turning into the Wild West. And as I said at the beginning, I understand that there are all manner of problems in the world right now, but there are very few problems that threaten our very existence in the same way that the problems facing the oceans do. As Dave Miliband said earlier this year, the oceans are the biggest failed state on the planet. Now, I'm going to end now. I was going to show you a very quick promotional video, a Sea Shepherd video, which basically in 2 minutes sums up everything I've just said, but I can't, so I won't. But basically what it tells you is that we are out there doing what others can't do or won't do. That's the strap line for the video. So I'm going to take any questions from you now. I think how we're doing for time. We're all right. We've got maybe 5-10 minutes just to take a few questions if you've got any. Just bear one thing in mind, I'm not a marine biologist. If you ask me anything really technical, I'll just stare at the ceiling until you all get bored and walk out. But if I can't answer it now, I can always get the answer, and you can come down and see us outside. So, yes, you've got your hand up first.
I'm curious, I think you probably know the answer already,